Thank you very much. The House Oversight Committee on Child Welfare System will come to order. Would the clerk please read the letter from Chair DeBoyer?
January 30th, 2025. Dear Mr. Clerk, I appoint the following members of the 103rd Legislature to the Oversight Subcommittees. Child Welfare System. Representatives Luke Meerman, Chair, Angela Regas, Vice Chair, Brad Paquette, Jennifer Conlon, Minority Vice Chair, and Sharon McDonald. Sincerely, Jay DeBoyer.
Would the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Meerman.
Here.
Representatives Regas.
Here.
Paquette.
Here.
Conlon.
Here.
McDonald.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 members present. You do have a quorum.
The House Oversight Subcommittee on Child Welfare System will follow the uniform committee rules stated in Chapter 4 of the House Rules that were adopted on the House floor. Any applicable rules adopted by the Oversight Committee. Chair Regas moves to adopt Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. in room 308 of the House Office Building as normal day, time, and location for the meetings of the Subcommittee on Child Welfare System. Will the clerk please take the vote?
On the motion to adopt, Chair Meerman.
Yes.
Representatives Regas.
Yes.
Paquette.
Yes.
Conlon.
Yes.
McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 yeas, 0 nays, 0 ayes. The motion prevails.
I'm just going to take a few minutes to thank those of you who are serving on this committee with us. I served in my first term on families and children, and I always called it my heart committee. You didn't get a lot of attention from Lansing in general and the paid lobby corps, but you were dealing with things that affected families very directly. And so I really appreciated it. My background with my wife and I and sort of the world we've lived in ourselves is, it meant a lot to me to be part of that. So I see this committee somewhat along the same lines where it's not always the work that everyone will see, but I would suggest that the work that we're hoping to do, the oversight that we're hoping to do, could be some of the more important things that happen in Lansing in an overall sense, because we're often speaking for those who don't have a voice, meaning children. So I just appreciate you all being here with us and looking forward to this committee. Some of the things we deal with will probably be hard and some not so much, but I also want you to know I think you all have my cell phone number, and I'm here for any communication you'd like to give me, even if you're not happy with what's going on. Please communicate. I thought it would be great to start off with the Center for Rights of Abused Children. I've gotten to know them lately and appreciate their perspective on the rights of the children and frankly the rights of the family as well, because at the center of this all is sort of that balance. And it's not easy for our departments, meaning CPS and others, to make some of those decisions, but I'm hoping from what we hear here today from Bradley Galbraith that maybe this will help us think through that decision-making process that has to happen in each individual case on behalf of the children. I think we'll just jump right in and ask Bradley to come and hear his presentation, and we'll see what questions come. So with that, Bradley, thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Push the button in front of you.
There we go.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here to present to you today. I'm grateful for the chair and his leadership on this issue, and it's near and dear to the center's work and our founder's work. And so it's an honor to be here. And hopefully today my goal is to present a little bit about the center and possible framework that you should consider or could consider when addressing child welfare issues here in Michigan. The center was founded by a foster mom. She, over the course of several years, fostered 10 children, adopted 4 of them, and throughout her entire experience, she noticed numerous injustices in the Arizona child welfare system. Chief among those is when she would go into court with these children, she would notice that everybody in the room had an attorney, everyone had a voice except the child. The department was represented, the parents were represented, even the judge could appoint the guardian ad litem to represent and help him or her in determining what the best interest of the child was in each case. Everybody was represented except the child. And so with that in mind, she founded the Center for the Rights of Abused Children, especially after one particular occasion where the judge initiated the hearing by saying that mom's rights are constitutional, baby's rights are merely statutory, implying that children's rights were somehow inferior to the parents. So our mission is to protect children, change laws, and inspire people to ensure that every abused children has a bright future. That's all with the vision that someday every child has access to and lives in a safe and loving home. We do this in 3 principal ways. So the micro level, we provide direct legal representation to children in Arizona through our pro bono law clinic. They represent children, they represent kinship placements, they represent foster families as well, all with always to try to center the voice of the child in these proceedings. We do policy advocacy. We've passed legislation predominantly in Arizona, but have seen our work start to spread to other states throughout the country, Louisiana, Georgia, Kansas, Missouri, Colorado, and continue to work in other states, Alaska, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. We've added this year, and I'm happy to be here talking to you all today. And then the third way, sort of the super macro level, as we look at impact litigation, trying to find cases that will help recognize the constitutional rights of children in care. I know I don't need to make the case for reform for each of you. I mean, you're here, and with the chair's leadership, I know we're heading in the right direction. But just to paint the landscape nationally through data, 50% of children experience re-abuse within 3 years of being returned to their parent. 50% of children removed from homes for sexual abuse are reunified with their abusers. Up to 80% of children killed by their parents were known to the child protection authorities, and that's a range. The highest state that we've found so far, 80% of those children had a prior history with the state child welfare system. Nationally, child fatality rates are rising and have risen by over 30% since 2010. 20,000 children each year disappear from foster care, whether they abscond themselves or are abducted from foster care. 70% of trafficked children were first exploited while missing from foster care. And then 20,000 children age out of foster care. Those children are going to face poor physical and mental health outcomes. 20% end up in prison, and 30% experience homelessness. These are dismal outcomes that we can and should change. And then nationally, only 10 states grant equal protection through traditional client-directed attorneys for all children in care. Just a quick snapshot, trying to compare and kind of place Michigan in that national landscape. This all comes from federal data reports. Michigan reported 35 child maltreatment fatalities. That's 2.04 per 100,000. That puts Michigan pretty much in the middle, 29th in the country for the child maltreatment fatality rate. 10% of youth will re-enter foster care at least once. That puts Michigan 19th in the country. The average time in care is 28.8 months here in Michigan, and then more than 25% will spend 3 or more years in care. Both are above the national averages of 22.6 months and 18% respectively. 45% of children in care longer than 2 years will move at least 3 times, and this is actually a bonus point for Michigan. You're actually in the top 10 here in terms of placement stability. 14% age out of foster care and into adulthood without a permanent home, compared to 19% nationally. So today I hope to kind of go over this framework for reform. We organize our work into 4 primary pillars. being justice, safety, family, and future. This work is all founded on the idea that children should be at the center of everything that is done in the child welfare system. So in justice, we want to make sure that we're recognizing, respecting, and protecting children's rights. Under safety, we want to make sure that safety is always the paramount concern for children in care. With family, we want to make sure that children are able to stay at home when they can safely do so. If they're not, that they're placed with a relative, and if that's not possible, in a stable, loving foster home. And then for future, we want to make sure that when the children come into care, that they receive the same opportunity for lifelong success as any other children has, that we're not hurting their future as a result of coming into care. So just to dive into each of these categories a little bit more and provide some examples of some of the reforms that we've worked on in Arizona and across the country. Under justice, making sure that we're establishing a just system. This is something within our control to create a system that respects the rights, protects the rights, and allows those rights to be defended of each party involved in the foster care system. Just to highlight an example here, in Arizona, we created the right to counsel for every child that comes into care, regardless of age. Those attorneys are appointed to the child as soon as they enter care. And then we also wanted to make sure that those attorneys knew what the rights were of each party involved so that they could be defensible. Again, Arizona, we created years ago a Bill of Rights, but it wasn't enforceable. Sometimes children, I think including here in Michigan, they have some rights, and those rights can be hopefully remedied through administrative procedures. We wanted to make sure that the child had a judicial avenue to compel compliance with their rights. We also wanted to make sure that in the interest of the child, that every other party involved in child abuse proceedings had rights and that those rights were defensible. So we also passed a Bill of Rights, not just for children, but also for foster parents and kinship caregivers. And we also passed a Bill of Rights for the biological family as well, to make sure that every child has their rights and that we were protecting children from being removed from homes unnecessarily. Along with the right to counsel, we want to make sure that the quality of representation is there. That meant, and this is a project we're still working on in Arizona. We have great examples in Colorado, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. All have offices that are targeting child representation, making sure that attorneys have the resources they need, the training they need to adequately represent children and families in foster care proceedings. And then the last part is another one that we're constantly working through is figuring out how to increase judicial transparency. The way we think about that is through open courts being a protection against potential corruption and biases within the judicial system. We want to make sure that these proceedings happen in a timely manner, that we're actually recognizing and operating under due process so that we have timely proceedings, that we obtain permanency for children as quickly as possible. And we also try to make sure that our policies and laws allow for foster parent participation when they have meaningful knowledge and experience with that child. Under safety, a lot of this centers around making sure that child safety isn't neglected, that it is actually paramount in these proceedings. Some of the discussions that we're having it centers on looking at what aggravating circumstances are and focusing on those cases where there is a real and present danger to children who are coming into care, and making sure that we're not reunifying prematurely or terminating unnecessarily. One of the big things that we had to work on in Arizona and have seen some good success on in other states is improving fatality reviews in our state. We had noticed in Arizona specifically that the number of children coming into care was declining and touted as a huge success, while simultaneously the children who died from maltreatment was increasing. And so we improved our maltreatment fatality review processes and are still continuing to try to perfect those throughout the country. Under family, this is one that is constantly ongoing. we had noticed in a lot of the cases that we were dealing with that the Department of Child Safety was not adequately searching for relatives on the front end of the case. We actually had one case where a child came into care and a relative expressed interest. The relative lived out of state in being placement for this child, giving this child a home. The department refused to work with this family and decided to place the child in a foster family, and it wasn't until 3 years later, after this child had spent its entire life with a foster family, this foster family had developed a really close relationship with the parents, had developed a sibling-like relationship with their biological children. It was only then, when they were about to terminate parental rights, that the department seriously considered this relative placement, and that shouldn't happen. Relative searches should happen on the front end. That should happen quickly, and ideally, children should be with relatives. And just as an example for timely permanency, and I'm happy to provide the research on this, Utah is a great example, and we're still dissecting what that looks like of obtaining timely permanency for children in care. And then the final pillar that I wanted to emphasize here with you today is making sure that children have a future. We have seen that children in care often have very poor outcomes when it comes to educational attainment nationally. Specifically, we found in Arizona that they had the lowest achievement rates in K-12 education. They graduated at the lowest rates of any demographic that we were talking about and tracking in Arizona, including children who were without homes. So we wanted to make sure that we could improve the educational outcomes, and that meant making sure that children's credits were transferring smoothly, that the best interest of the child was those meetings were happening in a timely manner, that they happened right away, and that if it was in the best interest of the child to transfer, that everything transfers smoothly. In the interim, we wanted to make sure that between the best interest determination and their entering care, that they had adequate transportation to get to school before that meeting happened, their school of origin. We also codified, it's a federal mandate, but we wanted to make sure our state was aware and following through that the school of origin was presumed to be in the best interest of the child. So really centering the child in those conversations and making sure they happened in a timely manner. And another piece, and I know that Michigan has been considering this one. It was a big one for us. Arizona was the first state in the country to pass a statewide prohibition on using children's Social Security benefits to pay for the cost of care. Those benefits belong to the child, and when the state comes in, well, it's not robbing because it is legal. You're taking precious resources from a child that they could use for their often unique needs related to disabilities, for example, or potentially for the resources they need to succeed once they exit care. And just to conclude my opening remarks, I'd love to answer any questions that you have and maybe dive into some of it a little bit deeper as your interest directs. But I think with this committee, with the leadership, there's an opportunity to really improve the lives of children in care here in Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for the work that you're doing around the nation, and the idea that, thinking of these kids and their best path for them is really important for us to try to get right. I got a lot of questions, but I think I'll just start off with, you gave some of the metrics, and Michigan got it right in one case. But are there states that are getting this right better than others? To me, it's, as I've talked to my colleagues here in one-on-one meetings, it's a pretty hard thing to get right.
It is.
Foster care, CPS.
And you're right. I wouldn't say that I've found any one state that does it completely right. As I mentioned, for example, with the quality representation programs, we think we've done several things right in Arizona, but we don't have a child quality representation program. We're working on that this year, and hopefully, with any luck, we'll have some legislation passed. So it's sort of pulling bits and pieces from various states. I mentioned Utah as a great example of obtaining permanency in a timely manner, I would hold them out as an example on that. I think we have a pretty good child representation system in Arizona. In terms of bills of rights, I think Colorado has a very, very extensive Bill of Rights that is also judicially enforceable. Ours, with the three, so theirs was child-specific. I think our Bill of Rights is a little more comprehensive in terms of providing rights for everybody involved in foster care. So I would say it's kind of pulling from different resources to figure out what best practices are and where to take legislation in the future.
Representative Collin?
Yes, and thank you, Chair Merriman. I'm very happy to serve on this committee with you and very much appreciate you have personal experience as a foster parent in this space, which I think will really benefit us all, your personal experience. Yes, thank you for being here so much. I had a question because you sort of touched on Utah doing this sort of timely permanency. Can you elaborate a little bit on what they've done, and also maybe mention? I know that we do have in the state Senate. We're looking at that Social Security benefit not going to the foster care costs, so that seems to be something we are working on here in Michigan. But anything you think that would be an area that we could help DHHS in terms of placing children outside the home when necessary?
Yeah, there are, Mr. Chair, Representative, I think there are a few things that can help placement. I think one is making sure that the attorneys are in place. We've seen that children who have traditional client-directed attorneys actually experience permanency at rates during a specific time period will experience permanency at rates up to 3.5 times greater than children who have sort of the guardian ad litem model. That comes out of research from Florida. Some other research from Washington showed, I can actually pull up the numbers, but they experienced a 45% increase in reunification, a 30% reduction in placement moves, a 65% reduction in school moves. So one of the primary things that we push for because of these results at the center is for client-directed attorneys for every child. Specifically, what's happening in Utah, and as I mentioned, we're still kind of trying to dissect what might be causing that. There is a real push in Utah for timely permanency. For example, they have these intensive monthly check-in meetings. A lot of states will push those type of meetings out further to like 24 months after they've been in care. Utah starts that at 12 months. So as a result, they have a really high placement permanency rate for children, especially young children, getting placed in a permanent position before 18 months. I think that's probably one of the big things. They just really push permanency as one of their priorities as an organization.
Just to hit on that question again, I think, because it was a unique idea that I heard from you, the idea that the kids have an attorney specific to them. Do you want to dissect that between kind of how we run it now and sort of why it would be different? I mean, title for sure, but.
Yeah, it's sort of nuanced. Michigan, and I will say Michigan's guardian ad litem model is much better than other guardian ad litem models that we see across the country. The big difference, so talk generally first, the big difference between what a guardian ad litem will do and what an attorney will do is the guardian ad litem comes in and does an investigation and determines what they believe is in the best interest of the child. So the adult comes in, this is what, after my investigation, I believe is in the best interest of the child. On the other hand, an attorney comes in a sort of a traditional attorney-client relationship. They meet with the child, they find out what the child wants as the outcome of this case. And then the attorney is then responsible for developing a strategy to argue for and make that happen. And so if the child wants to go home, for example, the attorney will come in and say, okay, judge, my client wants to go home. And for us to be able to do this is what needs to happen. Let's say it's a substance abuse case. Mom needs to get substance abuse, dad needs to get substance abuse treatment. It needs to happen now so that we can get my client home. The same thing would happen if the child doesn't want to go home. So they would make that argument and leave it up to the judge to make that best interest determination. The opposite, when a guardian ad litem will come in, they'll make that investigation and they'll decide, okay, based on what I've found, I believe that it's the best interest of the child for them to go home, or we should sever the parent-child relationship. So that's the fundamental difference between those two. Now here in Michigan, my understanding is that the guardian ad litems here do offer some of those more traditional attorney roles, so they are responsible for filing pleadings on behalf of the child, and they are bound to attorney-client privilege, which are usually, in most models nationally, are reserved to just the traditional attorney-client relationship. So here it's kind of a hybrid role, but I think that difference is significant. So the guardian ad litem still has to make that independent determination of what they believe is in the best interest of the child here, but they still have a responsibility to say, well, but this is what the child is saying. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Representative Paquette?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you being here today. My parents had foster children in our homes when I was growing up, and it was eye-opening. It made me realize what I had and was able to be much more grateful for my upbringing. With your guys' work and with child abuse, obviously so many intense cases out there. One budding issue that kind of arose for me fairly recently, I had an individual who runs a mental wellness clinic in my area out of Corewell Health, and she expressed to me that parents that do not affirm their child's gender identity disorder are committing child abuse. And so seeing this, and I've been tracking this in other states, children being taken from their parents for this reason, I'm curious if you guys have been tracking that, especially with the recent changes in Michigan law. I see this in the forefront. I see it as problematic, and I'm wondering especially if you have any insight there as to what you're seeing across the nation.
Mr. Chair, Representative, that's not an issue that we've engaged on in the past. And I think it's a tough question to try to handle. We've talked a lot internally at the organization about what it means, what parental rights mean, what are children's rights. And I think balancing the idea that children have their own independent natural rights, human rights, whatever you want to call them, but also that the parents have a judicially recognized right as well to raise their children. And so I think it's a difficult question to answer, and not one that I'm afraid I don't have an answer to at this moment.
Let me follow up on that real quick, and we'll get to you, Angela. So that was part of one of my questions coming up, was when do those parents' rights sort of end and the child's rights start? Like, that was my kind of opening statement about bringing you up here. That's always the hard part to decide, we as a state via CPS.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, so one of the ways, and this is sort of a difficult one for me personally to try to find the line as well, and I think it is probably for everybody. The way that I think about parents and child's rights, it has been called throughout common law is a sacred trust, and I think the idea of a trust makes a lot of sense in this case. So children, as the human that owns the rights, right? That because of their lack of maturity, their dependence on someone else for their survival, can't really function without the help of another person. And so those rights, I believe, naturally transfer to the parent. And the parent is then responsible for the upbringing of the child, the education of the child, discipline of the child. They have a bunch of duties that they owe to the child, right? So the rights of the child are transferred to the parent in trust. And then the parent has the responsibility then to act in the best interest of the child. I believe most definitions of neglect, I think that's a lot of times where these issues get sketchy. I think most people understand that if you physically abuse a child or sexually abuse a child, that it's a clear case, right? It's when we get into the realm of neglect that it gets a little bit gray. So at what point does that cross the line? And I think the question that we'd have to ask then is, what type of harm is being caused, and does it rise to the level that the state should come in and intervene? I know that's a question, not an answer, but I think that's where the discussion has to go, is what's the harm, and is it the type of harm that merits the state intervening?
Because it seems to be at kind of the core of some of our news stories. It's what you pointed out in your slides was the amount of kids that are dying after CPS has been involved. And there's also examples in my mind of CPS getting involved when they shouldn't be there over issues that I think belong between parents and their child. Have you seen states define that abuse or neglect well better than others?
It's a good question. The approaches nationally to the definition of neglect vary quite a bit. I think the common thread of the ones that I feel define it well include an element of harm, and that often there's an element of a willfulness involved. So there's also, again, Utah was the state that led on this, trying to parse out what is fit parenting and what is not, what is fit discipline, what is not. So defining neglect in terms of the harm caused, a willfulness to neglect a child, to refuse a willful refusal of depriving them of food, shelter, clothing, necessary medical care, whatever the case may be, that they're intentionally and willfully withholding it. But then there's also an element that excludes, for example, pure poverty from the definition of neglect. There's also movements out there the name is silly, but called free range parenting. So allowing a certain degree of childhood independence. So playing at the park by themselves isn't grounds for terminating the parent-child relationship, for example. So based on the child's age and maturity, allowing a reasonable amount of independence during childhood is another way that they're trying to parse the line of what is wrongful neglect and what is acceptable independence and growth.
Thank you. Rep. Rodriguez?
Thank you for being here. I appreciate your presentation. And it's a tough balance to strike between protecting parental rights and taking those rights away. And that's something that we need to take very seriously and handle very delicately, because we have seen CPS get involved over trivial reasons, and we've seen them get involved and then children have died. So I look forward to serving on this committee to advocate for the safety of the kids in Michigan, because frankly, one headline is one too many when it comes to these tragic events, and also these kind of frivolous events, like if you would like your child to have a different medical care, and then they try to take away your parental rights and try to take your child away. That should never happen either. If you choose not to vaccinate your child, or you choose to not go along with the gender affirming, stuff, if you'd rather have your child seek, professional counseling to work through their issues instead of try to make those changes, I think that we need to work alongside of parents, but also work swiftly and when there's an actual case of abuse. So, but one thing that we didn't touch on is like the emotional abuse aspect of it. And how do we recognize those issues from how it manifests in schools, bullying in schools. There tend to be issues at home. And how do we get involved with that and try to help ease those situations and help get those kids the care that they need? Because oftentimes those are the kids that are committing crimes within our schools or causing harm to others. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I appreciate the comments, and it does seem like trying to find that right balance, which is why we tend to lead with that sort of creating that system of justice so that we prevent even if CPS does get involved at one point, that if it's wrongful, that we're going to end it there. And then probably a separate conversation, but making sure that, or even when CPS gets involved, that services are needed. So if therapies are needed on the front end, that those are happening quickly, so that we can resolve these issues on the front end and do it quickly.
Representative McDowell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. A little surprised to hear talk about victimization of parents when we looked at the kind of numbers that you're talking about in terms of the percentages of children who've been sexually assaulted by their parents or being returned to those parents. Can you, and children who are dead, I mean, this is a little more important than their gender identity and how that's dealt with. Why do you understand that children who have been sexually assaulted are returned to that parent?
It's a tough question, Mr. Chair, Representative. There is currently, and I think nationally, a desire to reunify, and sometimes that desire is to reunify at any cost. And
Yes.
and I think it's unfortunately not. I don't know that it's really legislative or policy, as much as it is a culture shift. I think there are cases where children are wrongfully removed, but we know that there are cases where children are sent back when they shouldn't have. And so really focusing on child safety as the core of it. Like we always want to center the child and make sure that child safety undergirds everything that we're doing in the system, so that we don't err on the side of child fatality, rather on child safety. And we need to make sure that the system is set up in a way that prioritizes safety first, and that reunification happens quickly when possible. Or if it's not, then we're looking at other permanency options like guardianship or adoption, whatever the case is for the best interest of the child. But that all needs to be done quickly.
Thank you.
Clarifying questions. I appreciate this. Is one of my questions, so thank you for that question, Representative. Have you seen times where, because I'm a big believer in kinship care, just saying that out front, have you seen times where states have decided, we need to get more kids into kinship care, and sort of been driven by the numbers to make that happen, sort of in making it more of an unsafe, not in regard to the child safety? Have you seen that happening in other states?
Specific cases, I have not seen it. I think just generally, there are movements to create different safety paths for kinship providers and traditional licensed foster homes. But I think we would agree with you that we need to make sure that, again, safety first, that the kinship placement is safe, and that they'll be able to provide for the child's unique needs, and including with the supports that might be available for a kinship placement. Making sure that they are safe and that needs to be part of that immediate relative search up front. So we find them, we let them know what options are available for the care. So we tell them, this child's in care, these are the options that you have, these are supports that we can provide, but also making sure that placement is appropriate for the child and safe.
One of the situations we have going on here, and again, I'm a big believer in kinship care, but they're outside of the licensing as foster parents, and so they can end up in cases where their abuser is still around or in the home that they're now under the care of. They're under the care of somebody else, but their abuser is still there, and without being licensed as foster parents, the state really doesn't sort of know that. Representative Conlon.
Yeah, I think along the same lines, I was just wondering, you referenced a child who, they did find relatives nearby, but out of state, so this child went into a foster care situation that sounded very loving and grew attached. I think it sounds like the result of that was when permanency came, that child was transferred
Correct.
ultimately to the family, which was probably very disruptive for that child and hard for that foster family too. What is there who gets to, when it comes to permanent placement, if both are involved, do the birth parents always, or family relatives always win out, or is there equal consideration with foster parents? Do you think there should be or shouldn't be? And what do other states do? And
So
to be
the-
honest, I don't really know what our state does either on that.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I actually don't know what Michigan's placement priority is either. I can say that, and I'd venture to guess this is the case here as well, but in the vast majority of states, relatives will have priority over any other placement. One of the things that we did in Arizona, and we've also done it in, I want to say, Louisiana and Tennessee, and we're working on it in Alaska right now, is actually in a situation like that, we created a law in Arizona that said that if a child has been with a parent, and we limited it to particularly young children because that's where those first few years are critical for attachment. So I think our law says under 6 years of age, if you have been with a foster parent pretty much your whole life, that fostered parent then becomes a person with a significant relationship, and that person, that position in the priority is equal to relative. And so then in that situation, the judge would then come in and say, is it in the best interest of the child to stay with this family or with foster family, or go to a blood relative, and they will be on equal footing, and so the judge has to decide between the two.
Again, along those lines, I think there's also proposal for making sure the kinship, the search is made. I heard you reference that as well in the initial part of finding a placement for the kid. Was that a statute change in other states, sort of forcing that kinship search to happen?
Yes, in Arizona, and then what we're working on in Alaska, it is a statutory change. We spelled out specifically what that search has to entail, what the notice to relatives has to entail, what the timelines are. So federal law already requires this search to happen. Obviously, states aren't super great at complying. So we went into state statute and said, if we're going to do this and we're going to do it right, these are the things you have to do to find the relatives. This is what happened. You give the relatives 30, 60 days to respond with their willingness to participate in the care of the child, how they're willing to participate in the willingness of the child. All of that in Arizona gets filed with the court and with the case, so that the judge can maintain oversight of the search process to make sure it is thorough.
Thank you. I think I remember hearing like a social media search as well. I mean, specifically, getting that to happen. When you've been looking around the nation, how much does funding have to do with how well this job is done? Looking after these kids. Like CPS funding here in Michigan.
Mr. Chair, I don't know that I have a definitive answer. I will say, for example, Utah is usually one of the ones that is ranked pretty low in its funding, but ranks pretty highly on permanency. But I haven't compared state funding levels to that degree to know this state's doing it well but doesn't get a whole lot of funding. I know we hear the argument a lot that there is a funding need, and I'm not disputing it. I just don't know the extent to which that need is there.
Okay. Representative McDowell.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting, I hear Utah is doing well, and I know what an amazing community system they have there, and I wonder if that's part of what happens. I have a friend who lived there, was not a Mormon, but saw that network of families and how everybody, which is a wonderful thing for children, of course. But to come off of the question about budgeting and how much money is involved in this, the story you told about, I think, Arizona, that they would not consider going across state lines, I imagine that would really up the cost of that case. And how much do you have a personal opinion, or is there any search about how sometimes these decisions are being made just because it's cheaper and more expedient to just go ahead and send the kids back to abusive parents?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I think personally, I think, and just as an observer, I think there's a lot of let's get this case resolved in the cheapest and quickest way possible, but may not necessarily be in the best interest of the child, but don't have evidence of such.
Just to elaborate on that, I got a call from a superintendent over a year ago, and anyway, the point was they knew the child could possibly do some harm in school or worse, and the foster care system had tried to place them, and they were in that foster home for just a week, and then went back to the situation of the maternal parent, which was pretty bad. But the point is, there just wasn't, they didn't know what else to do with the child. So I know of one example where that happened, and it's not a good situation. Representative Paquette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another question kind of came to mind. One of the kind of crass arguments that I've heard advocating, here in Michigan we have abortion up until birth. Some say that, aborting our unwanted children will decrease the strain on the foster care system, things like that. Have you noticed with abortion laws around the nation a decrease in abuse based on higher abortion rates? Is there a correlation there that has stuck out?
Mr. Chair, Representative, I have not seen any correlation to that. No.
So we're under federal oversight right now because of really one of the reasons is not being able to prove where our foster kids are. You mentioned that as a real problem in other states as well. And worst case scenario, those children are trafficked or worse. So it's obviously something we have to get right if we, as a state, have decided these children are wards of the state and now don't have good records of where they are. In other states, what are you seeing? How are you seeing them prioritize that, making sure, when the child runs away from the home, that all things are done? I saw in your presentation, mandatory saying the child's gone, just letting people know. Do you want to get into that a little bit about how we're trying to make sure we're watching where these kids are?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. One of the things that we'd seen, and this is not just Michigan, it definitely was happening in Arizona, which is why we had to address it. I believe it's the Federal Office of Inspector General had a report several years ago now that said that there was no state really in compliance with reporting to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Just systemic failure there on finding and recovering children who are missing from care. We have passed legislation in Arizona that beefs up the search and rescue efforts in the state. So we went in and said that the state is not allowed to close a child's case until the child is returned from recovery, that they are required to report as soon as the child is missing from care, report that child to NCMEC, to collaborate with the local law enforcement agency. We mandated that they had to keep in contact with the law enforcement agency on a regular basis until the child was recovered. Last, I guess 2 years ago now, we opened up the search effort as well to allow more public notice for children who go missing from care, to sort of recruit those resources, primarily trying to target the use of social media to help recover children. But then also, when the child is recovered, to conduct a good interview with the child upon return to make sure that we're understanding what issues led to the child going missing in the first place, whatever the case may be. Maybe it wasn't, and often it's from a group home. So why they ran from care, why they went missing, what happened while they were missing, were they a potential victim of trafficking, as that's a significant risk for children who go missing from care. And then we also said that you need to start addressing the issues that you identify. So whether that's a change of placement or addressing some of the services that are needed, whatever the case is, that when you recover the child, you're addressing the underlying issues for a child going missing. So really trying to involve more people in the search and making sure that those cases stay open and the department is accountable for finding and recovering children who go missing from care.
Do you think in some ways there is the idea that, this is a troubled youth? I know sometimes when you go try and report someone missing, if they've run away multiple times in the past, I think often resources aren't used very quickly to try and find that missing child because it's been a problem in the past and they sort of want to be gone. I think that's probably some of what you're up against. Streamlining adoption for teens. I wanted to dig in a little bit on that, and I got one more question, and then we'll be done here unless anyone else has questions. So, before we actually gavel out, we will go through. We have some time to just sort of introduce ourselves and a little bit of our background, about 2 minutes. Streamlining adoption for teens. What does that look like?
So that was one of our ways that we tried to address the problem of children aging out of care without ever finding a permanent placement, a permanent home. So for those youth that come into care later, I'm trying to remember the specifics off the top of my head, and I'm happy to send it to you to confirm. But when youth comes into care, say 14, 16 years of age, the likelihood of them, especially if the parental rights are terminated, the likelihood of them getting adopted is really low. And so what we tried to do is when there are options for placing a child in a permanent home and adopt a pre-adoptive placement, that we expedite the process. So whether it's the home study, whatever checks need to happen, that all that is prioritized and expedited on the side of the department to make sure that before this child ages out of care and we lose jurisdiction, that we're taking care of everything to make sure they have a permanent home. Some of the other things we've tried to do for the older youth in care is making sure that if they're, for example, we just passed a restoration of parental rights bill last year for those youth that have just kind of languished in care for years and years. And if the parent has shown sufficient reform through the whatever services, oftentimes it's substance abuse or incarceration that these cases arise, but that's an option as well. So trying to really expand the options for older youth in care to find a permanent home in an expeditious way.
Yeah, the statistics of kids aging out of foster care without parents, it's rough. North of 60% ending up in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not cutting off conversation. If there's one more question to ask, but my last question is, on page 5, you're talking about reinstatement of parental rights in Arizona. Can you kind of walk through, how you define that or what you were doing?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, the goal behind that was to recognize that it actually came out of a story, a case, where a mom had gone to prison for substance possession of drugs, I believe. She did her time in prison. She came out. One of her children who went into care was subsequently adopted. The other one kind of exhibited some of those behaviors that we'd already mentioned, just some behavioral issues, and was jumping from placement to placement. We couldn't find an adoptive placement for him. Just really struggling in care. When his mom came out of prison, she saw that was the case and said, I understand what he's going through. I've cleaned up my act. I want to be able to give him the care that he needs. And so that gave rise to this. And I think somewhere in the 20s of states have created an option for restoration. For us, it was really targeting those cases where a child's likely to age out of care. So that was one of the conditions we put on the restoration bill. Child's likely to age out of care without having a permanent home, that the parent has shown sufficient reform, that the child agrees to the reunification efforts, and that there's a trial home placement, so the child gets to go home and see, is this, I want it, do I really want it, is this going to work? And then at that point, the courts can then reinstate, if everything works out and everyone agrees, that we can reinstate the parent-child relationship.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Rep. Paquette, we start with you, just maybe 2 minutes from each of us. We'll just maybe give a little background. I think that will help us as a committee sort of understand where some of us are coming from, or at least our life experience.
Sure, yeah, appreciate it, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Brad Paquette, pleasure to be on the committee. Was a former teacher and, saw a lot of heartbreaking stories. My team and I, we often did a lot of home visits. We tried to learn as much as we could about the learner, because you need to meet the young person where they're at, especially if you're going to apply the Federalist Papers, right, to their mind and their understanding. So we did a lot of that work, and it was eye-opening for me. Like I mentioned, growing up, my parents, had me around a lot of other young people that were severely disadvantaged, often homeless, sleeping couch to couch, things like that. And so learning those stories really, from early on for me, gave me a strong heart. Obviously, I'm very passionate about some of the issues that are budding right now in our current era. There's a lot that I don't think people fully realize. Obviously, some of the things that we all understand that were, I guess, fairly traditional injustices that we're all privy to, which are just tragic. Yet there are new ones that are occurring that are fairly divisive in nature with regard to the parent and the child. And so I'm trying to get as much understanding as possible with regard to that, trying to talk to as many people as possible, being on this committee, and the people that we bring in, an understanding. I like to learn, and so grateful to be here.
Rodriguez?
Hi, thank you, Representative Rodriguez. It's a privilege to be on this committee as well. I'd been around the foster care system my entire life through family members who had adopted many foster children growing up. In fact, I never really knew growing up who were my cousins by blood and who were the foster kids, because they were just all in the family. And I've had several cousins who have also adopted through foster care. And I've met with a lot of constituents that had issues and questions about the foster care system in Michigan. And when we were not able to get the answers that we were looking for within the state agencies. So that's what prompted me to get more interested in this area, so I could learn more about it, so I could advocate for my constituents in my district and help make positive change for the kiddos in our state. Thank you.
Rep. Collins?
State Representative Jennifer Conlin, and similar, I guess, to Representative Regas, I've had a lot of constituents come and talk to me. I'm starting my second term, but it has been something I've been interested in. I've talked to foster kids whose credits didn't move with them from school to school, so it was interesting to hear some testimony about that today. And recently in my district, we had just a very tragic situation with a foster family that I did talk to Chair Merriman about, which has really also piqued my interest in really learning more about how we can help and how we can support these families, support the children, and so, yeah, anxious to learn.
McDonald?
Hi, I am Rep. Sharon McDonald. My first full-time job I've ever had was in Belleville. I was a child care worker at Girlstown, which was a place where girls had been removed for either their own bad behavior or for physical and sexual abuse. It was very hard on them. I have 2 daughters with my husband by international adoption, and like mother, like daughter, my older daughter is now working in a very similar place, Camp Oakland, where it is a alternative to juvenile detention, and she's turning out to be a great person. She shares stories with me. I know how bad this can be. I know how confusing it can be, too, when a daughter thinks her father is her boyfriend. There's a lot of pain and suffering going on out there, and after my first term on the Family, Children, and Seniors Committee, where we did a lot of work to try to help foster kids, I'm very anxious to try to do more good work.
Thank you all. Yes, my wife and I did foster care for 8 years, and we adopted 2 kids. We have 3 biological kids and 2 chosen kids, so we're just elated to have the family that the Lord has put together for us. And for me personally, the foster care experience was good with department and with the agency we were working with. And there's a lot of good people working in that field, trying to find the best places for these kids. But we all know these stories, and I've got multiple versions written down of news stories of things when things went really, really, really bad. And so it's just a place that we can never stop working in or caring about. And I'm looking forward to just diving into this field, and we'll see where we go from here. So thank you all for being at this committee. There being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.